time the last time, so I thought I'd pay it back now.
I'm looking at the clock. I've been looking at the clock all day. I'm like, you know what, Alex is gonna, all right, I got 5 minutes on the clock, Alex. Actually, probably 6 by the time. Anyways, doesn't matter. We're gonna finish with a roundtable. So Tom, Luongo, Matt Ehret, come on up, and we'll toss them up here. The boys are gonna come grab that podium and get it out of the way.
Yep. I hope so.
This thing on?
Okay. Yes.
It's the end of the day. I get to do coffee, not water. All right. So we got 5 minutes worth to stand up before. Thank you, Alex, for the time.
Oh, that's true. You bought us more time.
Sorry, what was that?
This is our time.
This is our time now. Like we get to screw around to be and
We have 4 minutes to tell jokes.
I'm all over the place. I'm like, I forgot the time. They threw me a real curveball in the end there. Okay. Well, when I started planning this event 9 months ago, Tom and Alex specifically will recall probably a few different chats on, everybody keeps talking about Calgary. I don't know about, I said right off the start, I'm like, I'm not going to Calgary. I was pretty disgruntled about it because I'm like, I just know how much stress it's going to be. In saying all that, before we get into anything heavy, you three specifically, Montreal, Monaco, Florida, your thoughts on just the venue, the amount of people that have shown up, your thought, because you not pushed hard for Calgary. I don't mean to say they did anything, but you both, I think this made it a little easier. An international trip right to Calgary, boom, you land. You've got your wife with you, Tom, but just curious, before we get into any topics, I'll set the timer.
I feel you're still kind of on from your previous speech.
Yeah, Alex, you still got time.
What was the question? Okay, we had some fun with Alex's flight on his way here. It was a bit of a crapshoot.
No, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the driest wit in geopolitics, Alex Krainer.
So I get him in flight. He's flying everywhere. He's all worried, and then he doesn't text me for 2 straight days. And I'm texting him information. Got a guy. Shout out to Zane in the audience. He's at the airport waiting for him. I'm like, well, he's either stuck somewhere and like he's arrested, or I don't know. Did he get deported? Did he get hauled by customs? I have no idea. Pull in with Martin Armstrong to the hotel, and who's getting out of a cab but Alex Krainer, sitting there, and I'm like, where's your phone? Well, I've had it off for 2 days, been traveling. So the question, Alex, is what do you think about Calgary? What do you think about the crowd here tonight? Because you guys have been a part of the last 2 shows I've done, and I just thought I would ask for your quick thoughts while I set the timer again, because we're still on your time.
Well, I genuinely love this gathering. I love the crowd. I kind of feel myself thriving on the vibe and on the conversations, and I only wish it wasn't going to end quickly and that I could talk to everybody and that I could remember everything that everybody told me. But obviously it's, how do you call it? I'm a little bit overwhelmed. So, but I very genuinely, I very strongly feel that we are making a difference. I really love Tom's speech because it kind of brings together a lot of what I think this is all good for, because it matters. And is it some kind of a quantum thing? I think so, but I wouldn't know how to articulate it. I just know that it matters. And so the fact that you all are here and the fact that we are here and that Shaun organized all this, I think is, one of those little switches that is helping humanity along in the right direction. And I think that we've been now raised into this same matrix for many, many generations, to the point that, like we grew up, we not really questioning everything. We got educated in a certain system. We accepted certain concept of reality, what it is like, and that kind of gave us a picture of who we are in this universe and what we represent. And I think that we're about to break out of that eggshell, and we're going to be discovering completely new things, and we're going to be discovering ourselves as we probably should be. I wrote a couple of months ago, I wrote an article about this, comparing humans to chickens who spend many, many years, many generations in like a feedlot and have no conception of what the world outside looks like, and have no conception of what a chicken growing up under the sun and the grass should look like. And I put photographs in, pictures of chickens in wilderness and picture of chickens in the feedlots as just an illustration of maybe where we are, figuratively speaking, and what we're about to discover, or if we don't, our children or future generations might. And I think it's going to be good beyond our imaginations. And I think that this event here is probably part of that process.
Yeah?
Do you want to, you can chime in.
I'll chime in. Yeah, I definitely think that, it's famously said and resaid, probably to a point of abuse, that with crisis there is opportunity. It's the same word in Chinese, right? Crisis, opportunity. And I think that whether it was 9/11, whether it was waking up to the fallacies of the system during the 2008 crisis, whether it was COVID or whatever the crisis was that jolted us, it was a bit of a blessing, because it forced us to look inward and discover the better part of ourselves that we knew we needed to sort of bring out of ourselves. And I think that Alberta is a great example. That was a paradigm changer for me, because the trucker convoy in 2022, I had lost a lot of faith in Canada as a whole. I didn't think that there was really much patriotism or revolutionary quality in the Canadian spirit. As far as me as a historian, having looked at all the times we failed to really be the bigger part of ourselves at these moments of crisis throughout history that we could have been, that we didn't do, and it kind of jaded me a little bit. So when I got to Ottawa, and I just saw what Tamara and with Beth Ann and others were able to pull off, and discovered the Alberta connection sort of guiding and making that whole thing possible, it got me to appreciate something that I had overlooked inside of the human spirit, and specifically Canada, and specifically Alberta. So for me, I'm often writing, I'm a writer, my wife is a writer, we're often behind the screen interfacing with people on Zoom, doing interviews through the screen. So for me, it's just being here in a culture that has a morality that's much more intact, a common sense much more intact than what I'm used to interfacing with directly in my part of the eastern part of Canada, is good soul food, first of all, and just what you guys were able to do to just shift my thinking about what it means to be a human being living in this part of the world under this weird monarchical system of control. And what's possible despite all of that was a blessing. So I'm grateful to be invited here. I'm really thankful.
Well, after those two guys, I'm going to just make it look really easy for you Albertans. I'm here for the steak.
And the Edmonton Oilers.
Because that stuff is off the charts good. And I'm from cattle country in Florida.
I'm sorry, Flames fans. I'm just going to interject for a second. Him watching an Oiler game is maybe the best thing I've watched, and I'm a diehard Oilers fan. So you're here for the steak, but you're just over the moon. I'm surprised you didn't wear your Oilers jersey on stage again.
Well, yeah, I actually did bring my Oilers jersey again, and I was going to wear it to Nick Marianos' house last night because, well, he's a Calgary guy. But I know it would have hurt me. I know, that's why I didn't. I'm like, he would have starved me out, actually. But no, there was a great moment last night over at Nick's house after dinner. Everybody else was inside talking and chatting, and I'm like, oh, it's time for a cigar. I'm like, I'm out on Nick's back porch, and I'm looking back into the living room, and the Florida-Toronto game was on, and I got to watch overtime. And I hadn't watched a full hockey game in a while, but I'm not a big Florida Panthers fan, but being a Sabres fan, anytime I get to watch the Leafs lose, that's just candy, folks. And
There's something Oilers and Flames fans can cheer about.
But after my beloved and inept Buffalo Sabres, Edmonton is my team of choice, and it's because of how badly they got fucked by the Canadian dollar, by everything, and with expansion and how the NHL tried to take your game away from you, and it mattered to me as a hockey fan when I used to be a hockey blogger in that life. It mattered to me, and so all of those, Calgary, Edmonton, even Vancouver to a lesser extent. You had the champion that Western Canadian tradition, because boy, do I love the Western Hockey League defensemen. Like, if I'm a GM, I want your boys, because you guys, they are the best in the business. They really are.
When I started the show, I was with Martin on stage. I really wanted him to talk about Carney, Canada, all the things. And with you three on stage, I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on Trump, his first 100 days, what you think he's doing. I mean, this is a geopolitical roundtable, right? So we're looking, when I bring specifically you two, and now we're adding Matt into the middle of it, I'm curious, you've seen Trump in action now for how many days, and other things, as Tom certainly loves to, and Alex, add in the different pieces. I would love to hear your thoughts and give the audience a feel for where you think Trump is at. And, because we watch Carney and the Liberals play an absolute, I don't got a lot of praise for the Liberals, but what they did on creating Trump the bad man and winning an election was something to watch in our own country. Your view from the States, across the pond, out east, on Donald Trump. And feel free to go back and forth, gentlemen.
So where do you start? From you? Okay.
With you.
With you.
Okay. So, thank you. I have to say that so far it's been 100 and some days. My impression is very positive. It is very clear that Trump is challenging a very deeply entrenched status quo. I think that a really good context within which to analyze what's going on is something that Matt and Cynthia have written extensively about. And I alluded to it in my remarks a little bit earlier. It's a conflict between two systems, and what I was talking about is geopolitics, but it also has fundamental economic foundations. It's basically, Matthew will correct me if I go off the rails, but it's basically the conflict between the British free trade system and the American system of political economy. And the difference basically is that the British free trade system is kind of basically piracy. It's plunder of assets. It's allocating credit to speculative endeavors, and basically extracting wealth from, not just from colonies, but also from domestic populations. And it has always the same manifestations. It always ends up in Dickensian kind of misery and creates mayhem abroad. Whereas the American system of political economy, that's what it's called, that's the name, allocates capital to productive endeavors, to industrialization and to development of infrastructure. Today, we see the American system applied in China, and we see what that has yielded. And so Trump, by initiating this transition, and there's no doubt in my mind that he is sincere about this, he has provoked a very, very serious and very violent backlash. His efforts are very complicated additionally by geopolitical realities. And, I didn't quite understand his bombing of Yemen when he launched the Operation Rough Rider on 15th March this year. It seemed to make no sense whatsoever, completely idiotic and morally repugnant. And I was like, what is this all about? It's so stupid, there's got to be something else behind it. I think that now we're starting to discover that maybe it was a way to not go to war against Iran, to say like, hey, look, we're doing all this to support you, and we're busy, and so we're gonna put that Iran war thing on the back burner. And then when Pete Hegseth voted against the war on Iran, we saw the absolutely hysterical reaction against him. So that shows us that that certain political powers in the United States are so zealously and so fanatically committed to the idea of cleaning up the Middle East with these biblical messianic plans and agendas, that it's obvious that Trump cannot move in a straight line. He has to kind of dodge bullets, and some of the effects are going to be ugly. But I think that if I pull back from the hot button issue, it seems to me that he's initiating very important positive changes. And then another thing that reassures me is I listen carefully to what the European media are saying, what the Russians are saying, and what people in the other parts of the world are saying. And I see that in China there's a vague sense of support. The Russians are very positive and supportive of Donald Trump. The Europeans, the European legacy media, the British, British public officials, the French, the Germans, their heads are exploding. They hate Trump, and so that tells me that he's doing stuff right.
You want this?
Yeah, all I'm going to do is, I'll just briefly, I'll say that to Alex's point about Europe, what became obvious to me, and I didn't believe this about Trump leading up to the election and it really wasn't until I started to watch the transitions and he started going after, he sent Elon Musk after Keir Starmer. I've talked about this in podcasts with Alex in the past. It's very obvious at this point, I think, that Trump, Putin, and to a lesser extent, I even believe Xi, but I'm not quite on the fence. I'm still a little on the fence about this. They understand who the real enemy is, and the real enemy is continental Europe, and it's the old banking interests of colonial Europe that need to be destroyed, and that includes City of London, not Britain. City of London, the square mile. It's very important. That includes the Vatican. I hate to say it. And the goal is, if you look at everything that's happening, if you just look at all the little hotspots around the world and the way that things are shaping up, they are trying to bottle up the old pirates of colonial Europe so that they have no places to plunder. So they've lost Russia. They're losing the Middle East. Trump said very nice things about Erdogan, Turkey taking Syria, which blocks Israel from going to war with Iran. The French have lost the Sahel region of Africa. That's all gone. The United States, nope, we're changing the way we do business. We're not going to allow Janet Yellen to spend us in the debtor's prison and everything else. The United States is secured. What do all of these regions have in common? Unbelievable natural resource wealth. Europe has no collateral. I learned that from Alex Krainer. And since then, that model has made perfect sense to explaining how everybody is acting. Europe's only path forward is to plunder Canada. That's why they hate Alberta. That's why Ottawa hates Alberta. That's why Mark Carney is Prime Minister, and that's what has to end. When I read the geopolitical game board, folks, and I'm playing Donald Trump's faction, that's how I'm taking out all y'all.
That's good. Yeah, that's. I'm on the fence. I'm reserving final judgment so far and still waiting. I'm in data collecting mode to see how things pan out. Right now, I have a lot of my report card on Trump after the first 100 days. A lot of it is informed by what I saw him do in his first term, which was I approve of quite a bit, and oftentimes he would say inflammatory, belligerent things, and then that would freak people out, and then would do something eminently sane. And I'm hoping that technique and method is continued on. So, I mean, the restoration of protective tariffs, I'm very much for utilizing these things as an instrument that I think every nation, if it's going to be sovereign, should have the right to use to defend their interests, their industrial manufacturing base. It has to be done wisely, because you could have a Smoot-Hawley tariff type of approach in 1930 when tariffs were done in a very blanket, mathematical way, which turned out to be lacking of certain elements that were needed for a real recovery from the Great Depression, another controlled demolition wealth transfer, by the way. But that was a bad use of tariffs in my assessment. But then when I saw JFK's tariffs or FDR's reciprocal tariffs afterwards, what made them work, it was that it was combined with a vision, a concrete vision, albeit flexible, because you don't know exactly how the rural valley or the rural electrification project was going to pan out exactly. You were going to encounter engineering challenges that were impossible to solve. The Tennessee Valley Authority, the Hoover Dam, the St. Lawrence Seaway, all of these the Four Corners projects, they were concrete vision ideas of the future that would organize all of the resources. And there were tertiary, thousands of sub-projects that animated how the tariffs were going to be applied based on a national mission. Which I would like to see more of that. I don't see a lot of vision so far in Trump's second term, which I would like to see. That's why I ended with the Alaska to Canada Railway that he initiated as an executive order. I like things like that, like the BRI idea is a vision. And the other thing that scares me a little bit are transhumanists. If you have transhumanist opinions, okay, fine. But if you're ideologically, aka religiously transhumanist as your religion, which unfortunately a lot of these Silicon Valley billionaires are, I don't trust you. And so discussions of possibilities of iron domes or golden domes with a geopolitical sort of bent tied to things that look too much like what Elon Musk's grandfather was doing with Technocracy Inc. or what the North American Union was, that Mark Carney's network, or even Diane Carney, was a big player in shaping that North American Union idea. I see that being a danger that I'm afraid that is set as a trap for the US to maybe fall into the British Empire instead of liberating Canada. So that's a fear that I have, so I need more data though.
Those are all fair points, Matt. They really are. What I'll say is this: if you look at from the way I've mapped this out, that I really do believe it was a combination of, and this is part of what Trump is it's going to be a complicated figure because he was brought together by the confluence of three very important powers, factions in the United States: Wall Street, the sovereignist portion of the Department of Defense, and Silicon Valley, little tech, as opposed to big tech. And because of that, they all have to get paid in the first year of the administration. He's going to pay them all in some way, manner, shape, or form. So, it's not going to be, remember, I think we're all familiar with the Strauss and Howe fourth turning model, right? And in that model, and not that I'm saying, I'm not invoking that as gospel law or anything, but in that model, their argument is that there's always emerges a gray champion, and they're very specific about the term gray champion. Donald Trump is not a white knight. He is not a black knight. He is a gray figure. He is going to do a lot of very good things, and he's going to do some things that are going to be terrible. Lincoln was one of those figures. FDR was one of those figures. There are people like that through history, and it's because of their circumstance. And the situation in the United States, and the reason that you're still in data collecting mode, I think, and you're rightly so, is because the situation in the United States politically is so freaking fluid. We have judges literally in trying to stop deportations. They know it's extra constitutional. They know it's bullshit, and they're doing it anyway. We had the mayor of Newark got arrested yesterday for attempting to, bum rush an ICE facility. And all this performative crap, that this needs to stop. And this is all coming from those Davosian sons of bitches over in continental Europe. And they're doing it on purpose because they have to, as Alex pointed out earlier. They are on their back foot. Mark Carney is not their grand plan to win the future. Mark Carney is their last gasp at staying on the board. And that's when they're dangerous, because they've got hundreds of years old relationships that they can call upon and gin up a war between India and Pakistan over a weekend or somewhere else. And that's what we have to, those are our tail risks right now in market terms. And that's what we have to think about. Alex?
Yeah, agreed. And I think that one of the most important parts to keep in mind is that you shouldn't discount people power, because the people of the United States, and I think people of Canada largely, and peoples of Europe, as you see from elections that are being canceled, they're all kind of starting to lean in one side in this conflict between the two systems, right? And whatever dangers and risks there are about Trump administration and Trump himself, in the same way that people power prevailed to put him in the White House, people power can prevail to steer him in the right direction. And so I think that, again, this kind of gathering is exactly the right stuff.
Well said, Alex.
I was just wondering your guys' thoughts. We had Armstrong start the day, and he talked about how in Britain, they're talking about war, and everybody knows war is coming. You two specifically, and if you've been listening to the podcast for a long time, I think you got to go back to the beginning of 2023 or late 2022 when I first ran into Tom, and I started interviewing Alex, and along comes Matt Ehret, and we went from, I feel like war is inevitable, to where we still sit here today, and you go, I feel like we should have probably got pulling in by like 3 different times, and we still haven't. There was many a time where Russia would get bombed, or and on, and we talked Russia, Ukraine. When Armstrong talks in such definite terms, they're preparing for war.
They are.
Yeah, totally.
Do you see it as it's a definite, we're going to war, and by we're, I just hear Carney aligning with Britain and then Europe, and those people get pulled in, and just, yes.
Do y'all want to go to war?
No.
To fight for Europe? Okay, don't. Fuck them. Same thing here. Same thing down south. I hate to be blunt like that, but we're at that moment. What's happening all across Eastern Europe, Romania, what's happening in Germany, what's happening in the populist movements all around Europe, they don't want to go to war either. Are they going to be, now, history tells us that they can still pull us into this, and they're going to try some kind of false flag, but this is where we have, as Chris was talking about earlier with the consolidation of the media and the danger of it. I remember talking to Dexter White about, when AP bought UPI or vice versa back in the early 90s, and I wasn't even thinking about this stuff, and he was like screaming that it was the end of media in America. Like, this is 30 years ago, right? So that's a really important point. We have new media today. We're doing these things today. We have the ability to talk to you phenomenal people who came to this thing, and this will propagate, and it will end. I think that it's inevitable that they're preparing for it, but who's going to fight that war? Europe has literally gone to war with everybody they need, the collateral they need to build the weapons to go to war. Where are you going to get your iron? Where are you going to get your iron ore from? Where are you going to get the copper from? Where are you going to get how are you going to make the nitric acid to make the gun cotton? How are you going to do any of this stuff? You've pissed off the Russians. You're basically said the Americans are enemies of the West. You have no, again, it goes back to physical collateral. When are they going to buy it? No one's going to trade you this stuff. And they don't have the strategic stockpiles. And they don't have the political cohesion. And they don't have a population that wants to fight for them. So that's nice, unless they're going to just, shoot off nukes.
Yeah. That's really it. I mean, I think the existence of advanced nuclear weaponry has bought us some time. So there's obviously there's certain forces who are sociopathic, but they still have enough access to their self-interest to know that the technique that's been used to manage human society in forever wars for the last thousands of years is not very viable right now. They would prefer not to, but are they completely unwilling to if they were in a desperate situation? And that's where I don't know. If they, are they willing with their underground, palaces and shit to risk living for several generations, getting pastier and pastier, while you have a mass depopulation of some hellscape on the surface of the earth? I don't know. I don't want to think so, but these people do. There is a certain touch of insanity animating the strategic thinking of certain forces that have way too much influence, who do perhaps believe. A big touch, big thumb, big giant thumb. So it's a total concern. I talked to somebody. I just did a MAGA conference last week in Plymouth, and I spoke to somebody who is a high-level player at the Naval War College in Rhode Island, which is a key strategic beachhead for organizing the oncoming war with China. And he saw one of my documents on my table, kind of like what I have up here, saying, breaking free of anti-China psyops, and I have a picture of Xi Jinping with the hypnotic eyes and know your enemy at the bottom. And he didn't know irony. He was kind of like dyslexic or autistic, and just saw it and he was like, yeah, we're on the same side. We both want to destroy China. Okay, and then he just briefed me on all of these plans that they have to start by economic, warfare, to try to isolate China from their allies, do as much as you can, destabilize them, and then prepare for the kinetic conflict later on that he thinks can be isolated in a limited thermonuclear war space in the Pacific. He's playing according to video games. It's a board game view of the world that has no bearing on how reality actually plays out, but That's how he's thinking, and he represents a faction of scary people.
He does. Yeah, no, I know. And it's the same problem that like McNamara and the technocrats running the Vietnam War. It's the same problem. Yeah. Writ large.
Yeah,
and now they run the European Union.
With 3 minutes left. I know, and I'm like,
we can go overtime here. This is the last one of the day.
I'm like,
come on, Shaun, it's your event. You can do whatever you want.
I needed to shame him on that one, but
when I hear Matt talking, about China specifically, there's a lot of things in the West here. Like I think of Sam Cooper's work, but I just think of others. And I can't speak to the geopolitics of China, but in our own country, the fact we got foreign collusion with our MPs, it isn't just China, but there is a lot going back there. There was the MP out in Ontario, I believe, right? I think in Ontario, where he basically calls a hit-in on, and then gets removed, and Carney called it a learning lesson, right? I'm just curious, what do you three think of that? Like, maybe I'm just complete and utter moron. I'm not saying China bad, I'm just looking at it and I go like, okay, the outside, fair enough, but in our own country, I'm like, it seems like they have a ton of influence on what is happening within our borders.
Okay, so I gave it a lot of thought about what the hell China is doing, and I think that zooming out to large-scale historical process, you can kind of understand what makes sense, and that is that China understands who the enemy is, right? China has sustained a century of humiliation at their hands, and when the British went to China, they basically destroyed a 5,000-year civilization and caused it to become the world's poorest country. Until not so long ago, this was in the 60s and the 70s, China was the world's poorest country. What happened? 1971, Nixon decouples dollar from gold, so they know that the United States is screwed, that they're going to, deplete the host, and that in not so long in the future, they're going to need a new global cop. And so they designated China. So right away, 72, Nixon and Kissinger go to China and start opening it up. They need to build it up into a global superpower, into the next hegemon. And so my question, when I looked at all these historical processes, my question is, did the Chinese kind of agree to this role, or did they let them in order to behead the beast? And now, over the last 10 years, there's no doubt that they drew them in to behead the beast. Well, part of that is going to include infiltrating a lot of Western institutions, because the battle is cultural, educational, technological, political, financial, economic. And so I think that you know, if you look at things on the day-to-day basis, it may seem that the Chinese are a threat. Well, they are, but they're the threat to these European oligarchies, because I think that they made the decision to end them. But you can't end them in a frontal war. You have to end them by infiltrating their levers of power in society and taking control of them.
And bankrupt them.
And yeah. So it seems, I think that this is what the Chinese are doing. And if you look at the statements by people like Brzezinski, Kissinger, Soros, and so forth, pretty much around 2012, their talk about China switches 360 degrees maybe? 180.
They go orthogonal, because I'm a math guy. They go orthogonal.
So they were
mechanics thing again.
Yeah, so they kept talking about like China was going to own the process of globalization. China is the model that we have to emulate. Blah 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 blah. China is the future. And then at some point, I think it was around 2010, 2012. They all just switch and they're like, oh, human rights, China bad. No, we can't do this. And China becomes the big enemy. And now they're spending about $500 million a year with various think tanks to produce xenophobic content. So we have to be careful about a lot of what we hear and know about China may not be true.
Yeah,
Matt?
Or do you want to? I'll just add. I think the shift started really. A big punctuating moment was 2009 December at the COP14 summit. That was designed originally to be an event that was going in the midst of, you know, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. You had another fake flu being sprung onto civilization as sort of a test case, and so you had a systemic near breakdown, a pandemic, and you had this climate change summit that was designed to create binding agreements for nations to force a carbon reduction of everybody under a new global governance mechanism.
Right.
And it failed. It failed partially because of ClimateGate. So 2 weeks earlier, we had the circulation, the leaking of a ton of data that proved that the climate scientists at East Anglia University were just making up data and ignoring data sets to justify why we need to do this. And then the other thing was you had the Chinese and the Indians who locked themselves in a room with the Sudanese and didn't come out for like the entirety of the event. Just they flushed the entire event.
I remember that.
So all the promises that Obama and others had given the world, Merkel, that we were going to have these binding agreements, they came back embarrassed. You know, everybody was embarrassed, and it was because the Indians and the Chinese realized that it was going to destroy their people. It's a mass kill off, and that bought us some playtime, some survival time to play with. And then when you had the Belt and Road Initiative unleashed, you had, you know, the Shanghai clique lost one of their key guys, Bo, forgot his last name, but you had one of Xi Jinping's key rivals was about to become Secretary General.
Yeah, I remember this.
Right. He works with Quebec. His son works with Quebec's Power Corps. He was going to be the Secretary General, and he was part of the Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, Shanghai clique of billionaires that ran Jack Ma and a big chunk of the Chinese deep state. And as soon as he was flushed, and he was given life sentences for corruption, but he was going to be the guy. It wasn't Xi Jinping.
Right.
And at that moment, when Xi Jinping came in and launched this crackdown on corruption, this is the biggest thing we've ever seen. 4.5 million members of the Chinese Communist Party have gone to prison or been punished. It's a huge takedown. And you look at these people, heads of the Chinese CIA, Chinese security intelligence apparatus, head of the Bank of China, people who had played a key role for the World Economic Forum in Davos inside of China. This is the deep state of China. Well, and I think that's what caused that shift of narrative against China.
No, absolutely. I think you're absolutely correct about that. And it's the same thing with Putin. Yeah. It's the same thing with Putin in Russia when he took power originally, and they were with the reset button and this and that, all this stupid shit, and then he jails Khodorkovsky and nationalizes Yukos, and they're still butthurt about that, and now he's the devil, and then he's Putler, and and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. Nothing changes with these freaking people, and it's all because they want the collateral. They had decided that they were going to move their center of power. They had figured out how to flush the United States during the great financial crisis. They had their people in charge at the Federal Reserve. They had Geithner at Secretary of the Treasury. They had Bernanke at the Federal Reserve, and they had Obama, the Manchurian candidate from Kenya, as fucking president. They were winning. They were running the friggin' table. They ran the table on us.
Yeah.
And it was done. And then the Chinese stepped in and said, no, the trillions you put into to build China up didn't buy you access to us, didn't buy you political access like it bought in the United States and it bought in Britain after the Glorious Revolution, is going back to the 17th century, and how it's it's gone. You're not getting it back. And all of a sudden, Xi Jinping is the devil as far as George Soros is concerned. And yes, so I think you're both brought up really great points about the possibility that the Chinese got the opportunity to trap the Western capital that was going to move everything to China, and then cut off the head of the beast. And now, from a practical perspective, with the people that we have in charge in the United States, I just want to bring this up. This is important, which is the following: Canada being destabilized, either for Europe's purposes or China's purposes, because now I'm going to step back and go, hey, look, I'm not saying that China's great or anything. Now I'm going to do basic SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. If China is a real threat, which is fair, then Canada, with the level of infiltration from foreign governments that exists, is now a strategic national threat to the United States and will be dealt with in some way. I'm not saying that as an outcome that I want. I'm telling you, this is an outcome that would be inevitable, especially with someone like Donald Trump in the White House.
I'm going to try and lure these three to my room later. That sounds awful. But with like cigars and stuff. Yeah, that sounded really bad, but what I meant was I got the mics all set up, and I'm like, we need to continue this. I've gone, I was telling somebody, the whole goal of me for the day is to end at 4:44, a minute before time, so I never stay overtime. I gave this 6 extra minutes because, I'm fascinated by the conversation. I want to push on into it a bit more. I'm sure there's a ton of people want to talk with you guys, but people have been here since like 7:30 this morning is when they got in here. This has been a full day, and folks, I appreciate you all coming and sitting through a brainchild of, it's amazing. And as I'm in my final remarks, I would just invite all the speakers, if you're still here, to come up on stage. I want to make sure we get a picture before we all venture off. We have an hour and 8 minutes before supper starts. So if you're a speaker and you're still sitting in here, twos if you're here, make sure to come up on the stage here, and we'll finish that way. Tom had told me something the first or second conversation we ever had. And when I listen to you guys talk about China, it reminds me when I first started learning about Russia. And I'm not sold on China yet, I'm going to be honest. But you told me when the giants are fighting, just don't get stepped on. And right now, I feel like a flippin' ant. And he told me, I asked him what he could do, and he said, build community. Tom, this is, from your conversation, and Alex and you have been now a part of this this will be the third time. The first year, we had 147 people come.
Right.
Last year was 250. And this year, the number is well over 600 people. You told me to build a community. I'm trying to live by those conversations.
You big, beautiful man, you.
Tom Luongo, Matt Ehret, Alex Krainer, and I'll invite everybody else up on stage. Thank you all for coming. We, of course, have supper coming up at 6 o'clock, and you're free to stay here until 9. They'll probably kick us out at some point then. Is there any other speakers? Is Ben Perrin here? There's Brett Oland. Is Kalen Ford? Chase Barber? Twos? Twos? Oh, he's right there. Who am I missing? Chris Sims. Tamara Leach.
Tamara's coming.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 9. Who am I missing, folks? Tamara. Tamara. Oh, there's Rod. Chase Barber. Is Chase here? He had to go pick up parts. That feels pretty fitting.
He had tires to rotate or something like eminently practical.
Is Tamara coming? Is Tamara upstairs? She's out for a dart? Yeah, tell that good joke. Can you tell a clean joke, Twos? I don't want to handle. No, he can't. Can he tell a clean joke? No, he can't. All right. Well,
It's definitely not Tamara.
folks, I wish we had Martin. I wish we had Chase. I wish we had Tamara. But this is the cast of characters I assembled for you this year, the Cornerstone Forum, 2nd edition. We hope to be here for a 3rd, Lord willing. Thank you again for coming, and please stick around. At 6 o'clock, we'll have supper. Folks, thank you for being on stage with me tonight. Today, it's been an honor.